My name is Elisa, I'm 30 years old, a first lieutenant in the U.S. Marine Corps, my voice steadying despite the knot in my chest. The moment I stepped into the hotel lobby, the air felt electric, charged with the kind of tension that makes your heartbeat echo in your ears. I could hear my own breathing, slow, measured, though my hands trembled slightly at my sides. I was Lieutenant Elisa Walker, 30 years old, fresh from the front lines in Syria. I had just been handed a $13 million inheritance, a weight that felt as heavy as my combat gear, and now, standing in this dimly lit space, I was about to confront my husband's mistress. The realization twisted my stomach, constricting my chest like an unexpected ambush. There she was, her back to me, leaning on the counter, sipping a drink that was clearly not soda. I could feel my pulse quicken as she laughed, a sound that struck me like shards of glass. How could he have chosen her? My mind raced with images of the nights we shared, the plans we made, now all overshadowed by this betrayal. I adjusted my posture, instinctively straightening my uniform, the fabric feeling foreign and too formal for this personal battlefield. The red, white, and blue of my country felt like a mockery here, amidst my personal unraveling. "Shannon," I called out, my voice steady even though my stomach churned. I watched her turn slowly, her eyes widening as she recognized me. Realization dawned across her face, and for the briefest moment, I thought she might stumble back, but instead, she let out a scream that pierced through the quiet lobby. At that moment, I wanted to unleash all the pent-up frustration and rage that had been simmering inside me since the day I discovered their affair. But the Marine Corps had taught me discipline, had ingrained in me a sense of composure amidst chaos, yet here, amidst the fallout of my marriage, it felt impossible to hold on to that taut demeanor. Shannon composed herself, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment and something else, fear, perhaps. The love I thought I felt for my husband felt like a distant memory, overshadowed by this new reality. I could see her calculating how to spin this, how to manipulate the situation to her advantage, and I wanted to scream that she had no power here. I felt my hands balling into fists, nails digging into my palms, anchoring me against the allure of the chaos surrounding us. A part of me wanted nothing more than to break free, to unleash the storm, to assert that I was not just a woman scorned but a combat officer who had faced down enemies on foreign soil. Yet, as I looked into Shannon's eyes, I realized that this confrontation was about more than just bloodied feelings or torn-off facades. This was about reclaiming my narrative, about confronting a sinister secret and finding my own strength in the ashes of betrayal. The inheritance didn't matter, what mattered was the clarity that surged within me, the understanding that I was not alone in this fight. I had survived missions in hostile territory, and I could survive this too. Before I go on, subscribe to the channel. Here, we tell the untold stories of military women, courage, sacrifice, and truth. Your support helps more voices like mine be heard. The air was thick with the smell of burning oil as I stepped out of the tent, the harsh sun casting long shadows across the dusty terrain. It was a stark contrast to the opulence I had just inherited, a life of luxury now mingled with the grit of this war-torn country. I had always known that as a Marine, I would be called to serve in the most trying of times, but I never imagined I would be thrust into a world where my personal life and military duties would collide in such a jarring way. I could feel the weight of my new reality pressing down on me like the heavy flak vest snug against my chest. Each morning began with a reminder of my responsibilities, not only to my unit but to myself and the legacy left by my father when he passed away. His hard work and sacrifices had granted me the ability to step into a new world, one filled with possibilities I was still trying to comprehend. But here I was, miles away from the life I had envisioned. Instead, I was surrounded by men and women relying on me for guidance, strength, and a sense of normalcy. I often found solace in the commotion of the base, where the everyday chaos provided a refuge from the thoughts that threatened to unravel me. Some days, I would stare out over the horizon, the golden hues of sunset reminding me of simpler times back home. I thought of the mansion that was now mine, the one that felt more like a burden than a blessing. I had tried to focus on the potential it held, the charitable endeavors I could support, but those thoughts faded when I was jolted back to reality, my husband's betrayal looming large in the back of my mind. His face often invaded my thoughts, terrorizing me with memories of laughter and love. I had given him everything, only to discover that his loyalty lay elsewhere. It all came crashing down when I received an urgent call. A situation had escalated near our posts, and we were to mobilize immediately. Heart racing, I gathered my gear, the familiar routine grounding me in the chaos. My team relied on my experience. They deserved my focus and commitment. The adrenaline coursing through me was both a blessing and a curse, fueling my determination to prove that I was capable of handling any challenge that came my way. But as I strapped on my helmet, the thought of my husband's mistress screamed through the recesses of my mind, her presence now a ghost haunting me from a distance I could hardly comprehend. That day, as we prepared to move out, I caught sight of her, an all-too familiar figure watching me from the rear view of an armored vehicle. My heart dropped into my stomach, and I could feel eyes piercing through me, weighing my worth against the backdrop of my rank and responsibilities. The glance we shared felt like a collision of worlds, the bitterness of betrayal starkly juxtaposed with the unyielding strength I had cultivated in my role as a first lieutenant. I knew I had to step into my power again, to rise above the noise of personal strife and concentrate on what I had sworn to protect. I was a Marine first, everything else would have to wait. The sun was just beginning to set over the horizon when I received the news, and the golden glow made everything feel surreal. I stood there, heart racing, staring at the screen of my phone that felt suddenly indispensable yet weighty. The message from my attorney was brief, almost clinical: "Your husband has passed. The estate has been transferred to you." I was a first lieutenant in the U.S. Marine Corps, trained for crisis management, yet nothing prepared me for the way this news could knock the breath out of my lungs. It was an odd juxtaposition, grappling with the horror of loss while being thrust into a realm of wealth I had never wanted. The $13 million inheritance felt foreign, a mocking contrast to the image of my broken heart. As I processed the words, another image flitted through my mind, a memory I had buried far too deep for comfort. It was a day in deployment, a routine patrol in the outskirts of Aleppo. We had been ambushed. Time stretched, every second taut with anxiety, as my team and I navigated the chaos. The shouts of my comrades blended into a cacophony of gunfire and explosions. In that moment, I had thought that the trauma of war would be the toughest thing I'd endure, but the betrayal I felt when I found out about my husband's affair cut deeper than any bullet could. I shook my head, trying to shake off the flood of emotions. I couldn't afford to linger in that dark space. The mission had to come first, even if my personal life was in shambles. Then, I saw her, a flash of unreal confidence striding into my thoughts like an unwelcome intruder. The Mistress. I had sworn I'd keep her face hidden in the recesses of my mind, but it blared back to me like a siren. Her name hung in the air, heavy with accusation. I could picture her vividly, the way she'd toss her hair back, eyes sparkling with a brand of allure I'd never possessed. I had confronted them, of course, but that day felt like a blur of rage and hurt. The aftermath had spiraled into sleepless nights and endless questioning. As a Marine, I had trained to confront enemies without flinching, yet the moment I faced my own husband's betrayal, I had crumbled. In all my military rigor, I was no match for the personal wounds he had inflicted. The phone buzzed again, a reminder of my new reality, and I silenced it with a trembling hand. I needed to focus. My life was now intertwined with this inheritance, a fortune that had been born from a loss. I felt like I was walking on a precipice, teetering between grief and unexpected privilege. Every decision from this point onward carried weight: where to invest, how to honor his memory, or perhaps, protect myself from the shadows that danced around me. The possibility of a fresh start lingered in my mind like smoke, uncertain but tantalizing. I would need to channel my training, but the internal struggle felt less like a mission briefing and more like a battle for my sanity. Suddenly, the thought of seeing her again felt inevitable. The image of her screaming when she saw me after I'd made my presence known at the funeral momentarily alleviated some of my tension, even if just for a second. I recalled her face, twisted in shock and disbelief. In that moment, I had regained some sense of control, reclaiming the narrative that had been stripped from me. I was more than just a widow or the wronged wife. I was a Marine, and I would not let anyone define my worth. As I mentally steeled myself for what lay ahead, I felt a raw determination build within me. The mission might have shifted, but I was ready to confront whatever came next, both in my duties as a first lieutenant and in this complicated new chapter of my life. I grew up in a small town in Wisconsin, where the pine trees stood sentinel over our modest backyard, the earthy smell of wet soil and grass my constant companion. My father was a mechanic, and my mother worked nights at the local diner, her laughter echoing in the kitchen long after the plates were cleared. I remember those midsummer evenings when we'd sit on the porch, my parents sharing stories from their childhoods while I marveled at the simplicity of their love. But the idyllic image of home sat on a shaky foundation, one I wouldn't realize until years later. My parents were good people who worked tirelessly, yet their struggles seeped into our lives like the ever-present humidity. They never fought loudly, just took turns wearing the burden of unspoken frustrations. The whispers of financial stress loomed over us like dark clouds. When I first expressed my desire to join the military, their reaction was a mixture of confusion and concern. It seemed like an escape to me, a way to rise above our troubles, while for them, it felt like I was leaving behind the little hope we had. I remember my mother's teary eyes and my father's silence. As I grew older, the weight of their sacrifices became clearer. Every time I slipped on my uniform, I was reminded of their quiet resilience. The day I graduated from boot camp was supposed to be a celebration, but I found myself in a whirlwind of emotions, bubbling pride intertwined with guilt. They had given me everything, and I was still chasing something beyond their reach. Independence had a cost, and sometimes I felt like I was straddling two worlds, one that demanded loyalty to my country and the other that pulled me back to the warmth of my family's embrace. It was during my early days in the Corps that I learned about the darkness of human ambition, the lengths some would go to achieve their desires. I had been assigned to a unit that often dealt with the fallout of conflict, a jarring reminder of the reality I was stepping into. The consequences of decisions shaped by greed were all around me, and I often thought of my parents, wishing they could see what I was doing, wishing they could understand that every mission I undertook was not just a fight for my country, but a battle against the legacy of struggle that weighed heavily on my heart. The irony was not lost on me. I had inherited a sum of money that could change everything, yet here I was, still grappling with the very essence of what it means to truly succeed. And then there was the moment when everything shattered. Just days after I returned from Syria, I saw her, my husband's mistress, standing there in the middle of our living room, her shocked expression rivaled only by mine. The scream that escaped her lips felt like a siren, a haunting echo of betrayal that ripped through the fabric of my world. In that instant, the past collided with my present in a violent crash. All those years of service, those battles fought to uphold honor and integrity felt like they had spiraled into a chaotic mess. I had thought my life was finally on a path to something larger than myself, but in that moment of raw vulnerability, I was reminded of the conflicts that lay not just on foreign soil but within the very walls of my own home. I remember the moment I first stepped into the operations center, the hum of machinery and chatter wrapping around me like a cold embrace. I had been a first lieutenant for just under a year, and the weight of my new responsibilities felt like a physical burden pressing down on my shoulders. My hands trembled slightly as I adjusted my uniform. The crisp fabric was supposed to make me feel powerful, but instead, it reminded me of the scrutiny of my fellow Marines, some of whom were already skeptical of my abilities. I was determined to prove that my worth would not be defined by my husband's wealth or the whispers that followed my name. This was my fight, not his. As the mission briefing started, I focused on the maps laid out before us, tracing the lines with my finger as if they could somehow instill confidence in me. We were tasked with a complex extraction operation in a town known for its hostile environment. My mind raced, thinking about every potential variable that could go wrong. In those fleeting moments, I found myself thinking about how desperately I wanted to step out of the shadows of my past. I wanted to be seen as more than just the wife of a man who had left me for another woman and inherited a fortune that I never asked for. I wanted to be recognized for my skills, my dedication, and my unwavering resolve. During our training exercises leading up to the mission, there were moments when doubt crept in. I could see the skepticism in my teammates' eyes, as if they were measuring my worth against my title, rather than my actions. One afternoon, as we practiced maneuvers in the sweltering heat, a Marine I had barely spoken to before clumsily remarked, "What do you know about real combat?" His words stung, hot and raw, but I refused to let them floor me. Instead, I doubled down, pushing through exhaustion to prove to him and, more importantly, to myself, that I was capable. Each drop of sweat that dripped from my brow was a reminder of my resilience, my determination to carve my own path. The day of the mission, a palpable tension filled the air as we gathered our gear, preparing to step into the unknown. I was filled with a mix of excitement and anxiety, my heart racing as the helicopter blades roared to life. I looked over at my team, checking their faces for any sign of doubt. I resolved to keep my composure. It was crucial for them to see me as a leader, someone they could trust. We moved through enemy territory with our hearts pounding to a rhythm dictated by adrenaline and an unyielding sense of duty. Each step solidified my commitment to this path I had chosen for myself, one that didn't just belong to the woman I used to be. As we breached the target location, every instinct honed by years of training kicked in. I felt alive, fully present in each calculated decision, every communication with my comrades. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. When we successfully secured the asset, the relief that washed over me felt like a lifeline. Those moments of triumph wrapped tightly around my heart, reminding me that I was indeed worthy. I had stepped out from behind the veil of expectation, proving to myself that I could be more than just a name on someone's arm or a bank account number. In the heat of that moment, I knew I was forging a new identity, one that belonged to me and me alone. Every corner of my mind was a battlefield, a clash of fears and uncertainties. The sun was setting behind the hills of Syria, casting an orange glow that failed to warm me as I stood there, rifle in hand. In the days following my inheritance, the reality of my new life hit me harder than any boot camp drill. I was a Marine first and foremost, trained to endure, to overcome, but now the stakes felt different. The weight of my position, both in a war zone and as a woman with sudden wealth, was a burden I hadn't anticipated. Each scream and explosion reminded me that life could turn on a dime, leaving me to question my choices and my worth. When I received the news about the inheritance, it felt like a cruel joke. $13 million, but it was a reminder of everything I had lost. My husband had left me for a mistress, and all I could think about was the way I had surrendered parts of myself to keep love alive. Now, my heart was bruised, and my pride battered. That wealth, a symbol of freedom, also felt like shackles. I couldn't bear the thought of being seen as a gold digger or a woman who didn't earn her place. My combat boots were scuffed, my service record solid, but the burden of expectation loomed over me like the weight of my uniform. In that moment, I couldn't let the ghosts of my past define me. I remembered my training, the unyielding strength that surged through me when faced with impossible odds. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I took a deep breath and steadied my grip on my rifle. I was prepared to defend and protect those who couldn't protect themselves. My role as a first lieutenant was not just about commanding troops, it was about leading by example and confronting the challenges head-on. I hadn't come this far to falter now. Fear was a constant companion, but I would not allow it to consume me. With each passing day, I began to forge deeper connections with my unit. They saw my resilience, the way I pushed through the physical and psychological toll of combat. When we took shelter during ambushes, I would share stories of my upbringing, my struggles, and my aspirations. It was in those moments that I found solace. The camaraderie we formed reminded me of why I joined the Corps in the first place. We were a family bound by duty and shared experiences. They became my anchor in the chaos. I realized that overcoming wasn't just about conquering enemies, but also about embracing vulnerability and accepting support from others. As I stood on that hill, a newfound strength surged within me. I saw the faces of my team, brave men and women who looked to me for guidance. I refused to let my past dictate my future, and with every assignment, every patrol, I reclaimed not just my identity as a Marine but also as a woman capable of greatness on my own terms. The moment I hadn't anticipated became a pivotal turning point. I was no longer defined by my painful past or financial inheritance. I was Elisa, a first lieutenant in the U.S. Marine Corps, and I was ready to forge ahead with grit and determination, unshackled from the expectations of a world that sought to limit me. The sunrise over the Syrian desert was a wash of oranges and pinks, but there was no beauty in it for me, only the relentless reminder of my reality. I had met my husband's mistress just days before, a twist of fate I still found hard to digest. She had screamed my name as if the very sound of it would shatter her world, and instead, it had forged a hard, cold reality for mine. I was not just the woman she had deceived, I was a soldier with a mission, and while the mission was daunting, it was the personal aspect that gnawed at me. I felt like a shipwrecked sailor, washed ashore but still surrounded by tumultuous waves that refused to calm. As I trained alongside my fellow Marines, I let that wave of anger fuel my persistence. Believe me, I had faced countless adversities in my career, but nothing compared to the personal betrayal that now haunted me. The battlefield was my escape, my sanctum. Each push-up, each run, and every moment spent strategizing in the harsh sun reminded me that I was more than what life had thrown at me. The weight of my uniform was not just fabric, it was a testament to my resilience and my commitment to something greater than the turmoil of my private life. Every time I felt the sting of sweat in my eyes, I reminded myself that I had earned my place amongst the best, and I wasn't about to let my husband's misdeeds define my worth. But there were moments, usually in the quiet of night when the desert was still, that I allowed myself to grieve. I remember laying in my cot, the sound of my comrades' breaths forming a rhythmic lullaby, but instead of sleeping, I stared into the darkness, my mind racing through memories of laughter and warmth that now felt so distant. I thought about what my life would have looked like if my world hadn't shattered. Imagining what love could have been instead of what it was, a fractured mirror reflecting nothing but shards, tore at my heart. It was easy to feel lost, but I knew that I had to rise again, to reclaim my strength not just for me, but for the life I had fought so hard to build. The next day, I harnessed that pain and transformed it into determination. I doubled down on my training, pushing my limits further. I could feel the skepticism and even pity in some eyes as I ran laps around our base, but instead of letting it pull me down, I used it as fuel. Each time I crossed that finish line, I felt a little lighter, a little more fierce. The camaraderie of my fellow Marines enveloped me like a warm blanket, reminding me that I was not alone. They respected me as a leader, a fellow soldier, and through that mutual respect, I found a sense of belonging that eluded me in my personal life. Each bonding moment over shared struggles and victories fortified my spirit, each laugh and shout of encouragement reminded me why I had chosen this path. As I stood before my team, delivering a briefing on our next tactical movement, I found a renewed sense of purpose. The burden of betrayal still hovered in the corners of my mind, but now it was a whisper, not a scream. I was not just surviving, I was fighting, teaching, and growing. In that moment, amidst the maps and strategies, I understood that true resilience is not merely about enduring but about evolving. The mission was bigger than me, it was about duty, honor, and the bonds built through sweat and sacrifice. My journey in Syria was far from over, but with each day, I was not only reclaiming my strength but forging a new path forward, ready to face whatever came next, both in the field and in my heart. The moment I stepped into the sterile confines of the hospital, the scent of antiseptic hit me like a freight train. It reminded me of the operating rooms back at the base, where lives could be saved or lost in the blink of an eye. This was different though. This was personal, too personal. I clutched my bag tightly, feeling the leather bite into my palm as I made my way down the endless corridors. Memories of the last time I was here flooded my mind. I had been in uniform, a soldier on a mission, not a wife waiting to see someone I loved slip away. In those moments, as I approached room 124, I could feel the weight of my uniform pressing down on me. My rank, my duties, they seemed trivial now. What does it mean to be a first lieutenant when you are stripped of the one thing that brought you joy? I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but it felt like an avalanche was rolling inside me, threatening to choke me. I opened the door slowly, anxiety twisting my stomach as I tried to prepare myself for what I might see. The sight before me was unbearable. Mark lay there, frail and pale, tubes snaking from his body like lifelines. My heart shattered at the sight of him. This was the man I'd once known, full of life, laughter, and an energy that could light up a room. Now he looked so vulnerable, so defeated. I wanted to scream, to shake him awake and demand he return to the man I married. Instead, I felt the well of tears spill over, an unrelenting tide. I stepped closer, fighting the urge to retreat. I refused to let fear take over. I had faced much worse in my career. This was my husband, the one I had promised to stand beside through every storm. Sitting by his bedside, I held his hand, tracing the familiar lines of his palm. It felt so foreign now, so distant. I was grappling with the knowledge that while I had been off serving my country, he had been living a life apart from me, a life that now felt like a cruel betrayal. The reality of his infidelity taunted me, and I hated that it was making its way into this moment. I wanted to hate him for what he had done, but here, in this sterile room, I found it impossible. Despite everything, I missed him, the real him, his touch, his laughter, the way he made me feel safe. As the machines beeped softly in the background, I began to talk to him, even though I knew he might not hear me. I shared stories about the mission that had taken me to Syria, the success, the camaraderie, the sheer adrenaline of it all. I wanted him to see the woman he had married, the one who had fought hard to protect what we had built together. I didn't just want him to wake up for himself, I wanted him to wake up for us. I promised him that if he made it through this, I would forgive him, that the life we had could be rebuilt if he just held on a little longer. In that moment of vulnerability, I allowed myself to simply be. I was no longer a soldier filled with bravado. I was just a woman, stripped bare and aching for the love of her husband. I wiped my tears away and squeezed his hand tighter, closing my eyes and praying for strength. As I leaned closer and whispered, "I'm here, Mark," the sound of my own voice felt like both a declaration and a plea. Life was fragile, and the war I faced here was a different kind of battlefield, one that would leave its scars long after the fight was over. The sun hung low in the Syrian sky, casting long shadows across the dusty compound where we'd set up camp. I stood outside my tent, watching my fellow Marines move through their routines, some cleaning weapons, others intently studying maps. The air buzzed with a mix of exhaustion and adrenaline, a palpable reminder of the dangerous days behind us and the uncertainty still ahead. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted within me, especially since I returned from that chaotic last mission. The acknowledgement I received from my superiors felt like the weight of the world had been lifted, but it was the recognition from my peers that mattered most. It happened unexpectedly, during a routine debriefing. As I stood in front of the team, detailing our objectives and setbacks, I noted the way my colleagues leaned in closer. There was a respect in their eyes that I hadn't fully grasped before. After I finished, one of the sergeants, a grizzled veteran I deeply respected, stepped forward. "You did well out there, First Lieutenant," he said, the words like a gentle punch to my gut. I thought back to the moments of doubt I had, the lingering questions of whether I belonged in this world. His praise, given in front of everyone, filled me with a newfound confidence that I hadn't realized I was craving. Later that evening, while I was sitting alone in the mess tent, replaying details from the mission in my mind, a couple of the younger Marines approached me. "Hey, Lieutenant," one of them said, his voice a mix of nervousness and enthusiasm. "We just wanted to say you really inspired us today. What you did out there, it's not something everyone could handle." I felt my cheeks flush. I realized they weren't just paying lip service, they genuinely meant it. Their admiration sent ripples of warmth through me, reminding me that I hadn't just survived missions, I had helped others do the same. As I returned to my tent that night, I stared at the wall, mind racing with thoughts. The mission, the recognition, and even the chaos surrounding my personal life swirled together. I remembered the looks of disbelief and the hushed whispers when my husband's scandal broke, words that stung like bullets. They didn't matter now. I had my brothers and sisters in arms, a camaraderie forged through hardship and trust. I realized then that this was more than just survival, it was about thriving amidst chaos. I was not merely defined by my past or by the shadows of others, I was shaping my own story, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the strength to keep writing it. The air was thick with tension as I stood at the edge of the base, gripping the metal railing and watching the sun dip below the horizon. Memories flooded back, the stench of burnt rubber, the thunder of distant artillery, the hushed conversations shared with my brothers and sisters in arms about our hopes and fears. As a first lieutenant, I had trained for combat, faced fear head-on, yet nothing could prepare me for stepping back into a place soaked in both my past victories and devastating losses. I could almost hear the echoes of my fellow Marines, calling out in warning or camaraderie, and somehow, their voices felt heavier today. Returning to Syria felt like stepping into a time warp, as if I had never really left. The dirt under my boots, kicked up by the wind, was familiar, a reminder of all that I had sacrificed. But this time, I was not just the soldier who fought for honor, I was the woman who had inherited a fortune, only to lose myself in this web of contradictions. My husband's betrayal and the weight of the money were knots in my stomach, pulling tighter with every breath. How could I focus on the mission when I was juggling the ghosts of my past? It felt like a cruel twist of fate, returning to where I had fought to protect not only my country but my own heart. As I walked towards the command tent, I spotted her, the woman who had shattered my world. She stood there, laughing with a group of soldiers, her hair glinting in the fading sunlight like some twisted halo. My pulse quickened, and for a moment, I froze. Part of me did not want to confront her. I had broken free from that part of my life, the part that was riddled with deceit and heartbreak. But another part, the part forged in resilience and determination, urged me forward. I was here to reclaim my narrative, to stand tall in the face of those who had tried to undermine me. As I approached, I could feel the atmosphere shift. The laughter died down, and all eyes turned toward me, the first lieutenant now a target. I could see the recognition in her eyes, the shock as it morphed into defiance. "What are you doing here?" She spat out the words like venom, and I had never seen the truth so clearly until that moment. She was afraid. I had become the embodiment of everything she had tried to erase. I took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of training to keep my voice steady. "I'm here to finish what I started. And I'm not going anywhere." Her face blanched, and for an instant, I reveled in the power of the confrontation. But beneath that rush was an undercurrent of sadness. This was not how I wanted my story to unfold. I didn't want to be defined by betrayal or resentment, I wanted to rise above it. The conflict wasn't merely external, it swirled inside me, a reminder of who I had been and who I was becoming. As I stood there, I knew this moment was pivotal, not just for me, but for her and all the excess baggage from my past. It was time to take my life back, but first, I had to embrace the discomfort of standing firm, staring down the impact of betrayal and loss, and leading with strength. I still remember the day I received the call from the Pentagon. It was just a few hours after we returned from our mission in Syria, and my heart was still racing from the adrenaline. I'd barely had time to process the weight of the operation, the loss of comrades, and the responsibility resting on my shoulders. Hearing the official tone on the other end made my stomach knot. "We need to discuss your situation, First Lieutenant." The line went quiet for a moment, as if the gravity of my predicament had paused time itself. It felt surreal, like I was a character in a movie, grappling with a fate too intense to comprehend. The news spread quickly, as it often does within military circles. I'd just returned from a dangerous mission, and now I was thrust into a public spotlight I never asked for. My husband's infidelity had not only shattered my marriage but also painted a target on my back, both personally and professionally. I met with my family in the days that followed, and their reactions ranged from fierce protectiveness to painful disappointment. My brother, a fellow Marine, clenched his jaw when he heard the details of my husband's betrayal and the mistress's dramatic entrance into my life. "You don't deserve this, Elisa. You've sacrificed so much." His anger was palpable, but it didn't make the weight of shame any lighter for me. As for my parents, their responses were a mix of concern and support, punctuated by the worry lines etched deeper into their faces. My father, a decorated veteran himself, tried to reassure me, though his voice trembled with a protective instinct I could sense even through his steadfast facade. "You've faced down dangerous situations in combat. You'll get through this." But that didn't change the reality of the whispers that followed me through each establishment, each meeting. It felt like a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding, and no amount of military resolve could shield me from the emotional toll. Meanwhile, I was thrust into a world where social media amplified my every struggle. My name, usually associated with bravery and respect, became a point of gossip and intrigue. The narrative spun out of control when the mistress had the audacity to confront me in public, her screams shattering the mundanity of an afternoon grocery trip. My cheeks flushed with a mix of disbelief and anger as I stood there, the weight of her toxicity clashing violently with my composure. I had been in life-or-death situations, commanding a team and making impossible choices, yet facing her felt like an entirely different battle. It was in that moment I questioned whether I was strong enough to navigate my way through the wreckage left behind. Despite the tumultuous chaos, I knew I needed to harness my anger and disappointment into a renewed sense of purpose. As the military began an official review of the circumstances surrounding my case, my actions in Syria and the subsequent fallout of my personal life, I found myself drawing strength from my training, my comrades. The public conclusion of the investigation was imminent, and I braced myself for the fallout. The fear of being reduced to my husband's choices haunted me, but deep down, I had a warrior's resolve. I had defied odds before, and I wasn't about to let this define me. In my heart, I carried the memories of those I'd lost in Syria, and their courage pushed me forward, telling me that I could rise from this, too. As I sit on the edge of my bed, the golden rays of the morning sun filtering through the window, I can't help but reflect on the journey that has led me here, both in Syria and in my own heart. The world outside has a new vibrance, a clarity that feels almost surreal. The chaos, the fear, and the uncertainty I faced during the mission feel like echoes of a far-off dream. And yet, they shaped me, carved me into something stronger, something resolute. I am no longer the girl who craved approval from those who belittled me. I've shattered that need into a million pieces. They didn't define my worth then, and they never will again. Reclaiming my power was a journey I didn't anticipate. When I first inherited that $13 million, the whispers behind my back morphed from admiration to disdain. Everyone suddenly had an opinion, including the very people who had questioned my competence. They thought I'd crumble under the weight of it all: family, finances, and the specter of betrayal, with my husband's affair hanging over my head like a cloud. But I found strength in the knowledge that I had faced fears far greater than social judgment. I had survived in the harshest terrains, both physically and emotionally, solidifying my belief that my worth comes from within. A part of me still remembers the moment I caught my husband with her, the woman who thought she could take my place not just in his life, but in the world. I almost crumbled in that instant, but the scream that escaped her lips was the turning point for me. It was a stark reminder that strength is often born from vulnerability. I realized that I had the power to rewrite my story. I needed to reclaim not just my dignity but my identity. I could stand tall, proud of what I had accomplished, not just as a Marine, but as a woman who refused to be sidelined by the failures of others. My battlefield wasn't just in Syria, it was in my heart and mind. Moving forward, I've begun to build something new, a future that embraces my ambitions and passions. The path won't always be smooth, but I'll walk it with my head held high. My mission in Syria taught me that resilience is forged in the fires of adversity, but it's also about recognizing one's own value. I've invested time in nurturing my dreams, and for the first time in a long time, I'm excited about what lies ahead. I'm learning that healing is not linear, nor is it easy, but it's a journey worth taking. As I glance out at the city, the skyline standing tall against the horizon, I see the reflection of a woman transformed. I am no longer just a survivor, I am a warrior, ready to embrace whatever comes next. I've learned to find beauty in the chaos and purpose in the struggle. The past doesn't define me, instead, it fuels my fire. So here I am, standing on the precipice of my new life, a life filled with infinite possibilities. I am the architect of my own destiny, and I will build it with unwavering strength and fierce determination. If you stayed with me until the end, thank you. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments which city you're watching from.